In today's video, I'm going to give you 9 colour mixing tips for watercolour flowers. Welcome back to my channel. If you have not been here before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel we do all things watercolour as well as drawing tutorials, even a little bit of mixed media and motivation too. Please do consider subscribing. Unlike most channels here on YouTube, we are fully cat approved. Now, I have lots of colour mixing and colour mixing help videos here on YouTube, but this week we're going to look specifically at botanicals and flowers. I'm going to give you some of the tips and tricks that I use in mixing colours for my own flower paintings, because above all what we're looking for is that vitality, brightness of colour and freshness. So let's get started. My first tip is not to use yellow ochre for flower painting. Let me tell you why and give you some better alternatives. So let's look at yellow ochre. Now, if you're wondering why some of my paints are in these small pots with handwritten lids, it's because some of them are manufacturer's samples. This is a Jackman's Watercolors Yellow Ochre. It's one of the brighter, clearer ones, and yet you can see that the properties of the pigment of yellow ochre is to be opaque and granular. Now, I just don't know, even if we water it down, I just don't know many flowers that look this heavy and grainy. There's nothing wrong with yellow ochre. It's a fabulous pigment. I love it for landscapes. It can even, if we add a bit of blue into it, even make some really interesting murky sort of greens. But I just don't think it's very good for flower painting. Maybe you have a cool yellow like this, a lemon or an Aurelian, and then you have yellow ochre because you've bought a set. You really need a warm yellow too. This is one of my favourites. It's a cadmium yellow deep. For something even more transparent, we've got an azo yellow. You can also use colours like Indian yellow. You can see how bright and clear these colours are and how much better they work for flower painting than yellow ochre. My next tip is don't use white paint for flowers. There's a very specific reason why. Let me explain. So why shouldn't you use white paint for flower painting? Now, some people don't like using white paint in watercolour painting whatsoever. They get quite angry about it. I am not one of those people. White paint used sparingly can actually be really useful for certain effects and certain subjects. So if I take some of my pink here, this is some permanent rose, and we'll see what happens if I add white to it. And this is me being too lazy to get a palette out. So I've got my pink here. So what happens when we mix white in is we make the colour opaque. Now, certainly it's lighter, but I think you can see how opaque it is. And that's going to look out of place. Now, of course, you can paint flowers in opaque media. You can paint them in gouache and acrylics, and they have a certain charm to them. But one of the fantastic things about watercolour is its transparency, and most flower petals are somewhat transparent. So to use white to make your colours lighter is really saying goodbye to the beautiful transparency that the medium is known for. You can make any colour as light as you like just by adding more water. Many greens that come pre-mixed in beginner's sets are way too bright. Let me show you why the green that you have in your set may not be the best for botanicals. And I'm also going to show you how you can not waste that green, but adjust it in several ways to make it much more natural looking. My next tip is to learn to adjust your greens. Now, many beginners paint sets only contain one green, and it's usually this one, which is phthalo green. It's incredibly bright. It's fantastic for mixing, but you can see that it's not the most natural green in the world, is it? You'll sometimes find it labelled Viridian. Now, Viridian is a pigment in itself, but is sometimes mislabelled, so sometimes phthalo will be called Viridian. Or you might get something called Viridian hue. What that means is that this is a colour that looks like Viridian. You may also see this labelled emerald in cheaper sets, and there's two main ways that you can make this a bit more useful. The first one is you can pop some of its opposite in. So we're talking about a pink. I'll just put a little in, because if we go too far, we may actually sort of make a grey. But just putting a little pink in, you can see how we've muted that colour somewhat. It's not quite as in your face. The other really easy way to adjust this colour is to put a warm yellow in. I can go for something bright and clear like this azo yellow. Woo, look at that. Now we're going into those brighter, more lime colours. Alternatively, I can pick something a lot more muted like this yellow ochre and I can get some much more natural greens going on. I did a whole video about how important pink is as a mixing colour. Of course, is vital for flowers as well. I'll link that video in the description of this one in case you want to deep dive further into that subject. And by a good pink, I don't mean alizarin crimson. Let me show you what you need. Let's swatch first of all some alizarin crimson, which is often the only pink that you get in a beginner's set, and here it is. It's certainly a pretty colour, and if we water it down, looks like an English rose, doesn't it? However, it's simply not bright enough to get really fantastic punchy purples and magentas. Let me swatch a little bit of permanent rose next to it. You're going to instantly see the difference. And you see that this pink is brighter, it's clearer, it's fantastic for flower painting. If we add in some blue, we can immediately make beautiful purples that we simply won't get if our only mixing colour is alizarin crimson. Now, some permanent roses can be a little bit on the peach side. Another colour that's great for this is a quinacridone pink, so do make sure that you have a bright, what I would call a blue-based pink in your set for mixing and for using alone, because alizarin crimson simply doesn't have the range and the usefulness of a proper bright pink. Have you noticed how some flowers, particularly roses, have some red in with the green, or they may look kind of brownish? Let me show you an easy trick for knowing exactly which colours to mix. Have you noticed how some red flowers seem to have a little bit of that red colour transferring into the stems? I notice this all the time with roses, it's even in the leaves. Now, you don't have to wonder about which red to adjust your leaves and stems with, because flowers are a bit like people, they all have their individual colour palette, and so all you need to do is add the red that you used for the flower into the green. Obviously you want to be sparing because red is a strong colour, and you'll instantly get exactly the colour you need. And where your leaf or your stem goes brown and you can see hints of red, just use the colour you've already chosen for your flower and you're going to get exactly the colour palette and the effect you need. You don't need to find a different red or a different brown, just use the one that you know is already part of the makeup of the flower. Purple is a colour often seen in flowers, and I've seen some really disastrous purple mixes. You can't just grab any blue and any red and expect it to make a good purple. Let me show you how to do it. Have you ever tried to mix a bright purple for some beautiful purple flowers and found that it all goes horribly wrong? Perhaps you've taken a red like this one and added some blue. Need a bit more red in that, don't we? And you've tried to make a purple and you've ended up with this. So what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this is you're choosing the wrong red and you're choosing the wrong blue. So the red I used was called Poppy Red and it's a scarlet red. It's a red from my flower painting set, but that's not the problem with it. It's great for poppies, but it's not going to mix a good purple. The blue I mixed with it was a phthalo blue. Now, both of these colours have something in common. They have a touch of yellow in. So the red tends towards the orange end of the spectrum and the blue tends towards the green or yellow end of the spectrum. To mix an effective purple, we need to choose a red and a blue that are quite close to purple already. So let's try something different. Instead of my scarlet red, I'm going to choose a pink. And instead of a turquoise or a teal-based blue, I'm going to choose this ultramarine, which already tends slightly towards purple. Here it is. Let's try these. And we've solved our purple problem. At this point, can I just pop in briefly and ask you to press the like button, to press that thumbs up for me? Likes, shares, subscribes and comments really make a big difference here on YouTube and enable me to make more free videos for you. I also have a full watercolor flower painting course. That one will be ready. I'm not quite sure when this video is going up, but that one will be ready at the end of May 2024. And I have a fantastic, really big discount on launch. I always do a big discount on launch of new courses. You'll want to make sure that you're either in my Facebook group or on my mailing list. You can get into my mailing list by downloading any of the free PDFs and courses. You'll find them all in the description of this video. Some artists don't like Payne's grey, won't use Payne's grey. It's often the only grey that you get in a set. I absolutely love Payne's grey, but it's not very suitable for shadows on flowers. Let me show you why it's just too heavy and give you some alternatives that you can either buy ready-made or mix yourself. For this tip, I want you to stop using Payne's grey for shadows, particularly shadows on white flowers. There are some pre-mixed options you can get. If you want something that tends a little bit greenish, then Davy's grey is a great alternative. I've actually got my own colour called Petal Shadow, who Jackman's Art Materials manufacture for me. That's more lilac based. You can also mix your own shadow colours. So whatever colours you're using already in your flower painting, you can work from there. So let's assume I am using my permanent rose for my flowers, and perhaps somewhere else in the picture I've used this phthalo blue and I've used some yellow as well. Mixing these three primary colours together will get me a nice grey. Now grey is majority blue pigment, so we're going to start with the blue and pop little bits of the other two in. So I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in just to turn it to green. And then I'm going to put a little bit of pink in. Pink can be quite strong, so trying to go easy on it. And we can balance these colours out until we start to get some nice neutral greys. I can push this into a blue grey by adding more blue, a green grey by adding more yellow, or a lilac grey by adding more pink. By using colours you're already mixing from within your painting, you're going to get a much more delicate, fresher and more beautiful grey than you would ever get by using Payne's grey, which has a lot of black pigments and is far too heavy for delicate flowers. My next trick is something I've shown in other videos. It's called ghost leaves. No, they don't haunt you, but they will help to give a little bit of depth and perspective to your picture. Let's talk about colour mixing in order to push things in your painting back. So I have a technique that I like to call ghost leaves, and I'll pop up a picture where I have used this technique. It doesn't have to be used only for leaves, but this is where I use it most commonly. What you're going to do is for some of the leaves at the back of your flowers or at the back of your plants, you're going to mix yourself a very muted blue, grey, green. And you're going to paint those leaves very, very simply, without veins or details, or certainly with less details than the ones in the front. Aerial perspective says that anything that is less defined, cooler in colour, softer, greyer, bluer, is going to appear to our eyes to be further back. So mixing ghost leaves can help to push some of the parts of your plant backwards, which will in turn give depth and perspective to your work. Do you find your flower paintings often look dull? This next tip is all about painting directly onto white paper and how important it is. I'll give you a visual demonstration of why this matters. Knowing how to manage a background in your flower painting is one of the hardest things, but you simply must put your flowers in at the start and they must go on pure white paper because we need that clarity of colour and we need the white paper to glow through. Many flowers are pink or red or orange or something that's got red in, and many backgrounds are green. This gives us the difficulty of if we layer on top, we're actually mixing opposite colours together. Underneath layers will often disturb a little bit depending on what the pigment is. And we're just going to lose that brightness and clarity that we get with our pure white paper. The other reason you should put your flowers in first is because flowers are the first things to move or change. If you're doing a garden painting, it's very easy just to cover up the areas where the flowers go. If you're painting from real life, those flowers may move or the petals may drop long before anything else becomes impossible to paint. There's no easy solution. You really do have to almost put the background around the flowers. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, that's almost impossible for me, I would rather see a flower painting with no background than one where the bright flowers have been killed by putting them on top of a green background. I have many free tutorials on my YouTube channel that'll show you how to approach different types of backgrounds. There's always a solution, but remember, flowers in first and always on white paper. Let me know in the comments what you found most useful about this video. Perhaps you have some of your own tips and tricks that you like to use when painting flowers. Feel free to share those as well. If you enjoyed this video but you find drawing flowers a little bit tricky, you're going to find this next video really helpful.